I don't know.
And I keep meaning to go and have a tour of that.
Yeah, that'd be fun to go.
Upstairs bathroom as well, back around here.
4 years ago, I came for them to talk here. They didn't have permission to let people in yet.
Oh, is that right?
So I did the talk on the porch.
Oh, it's ready. Yeah. Yeah. Are you ready, Brian?
Sure.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Craighead House. This is our first event of the season, so we're very happy to have you here. I'd like to introduce Brian and Jolene Howard. They were part of the, they are art conservationists, and Brian will explain what they do and the various things they do here. And they helped us conserve and preserve the kitchen artwork in the back, so they will be talking a little bit about that as well as he goes through his program explaining what he does and how he does it and the various things he's done. So,
Okay, thank you.
I give it over to you.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for coming out. I generally have I try never to give lectures just before lunch, right after lunch, and now I'm going to add spring days. This is, after a few days of rain, it's nice to be outside. And anyhow, thanks for being here. I've already said to Ann that I'm going to try not to be any longer than some pastors I've known. So so I have my timer here. There's a lot of slides, and some I can go through fast, and if there's anything that catches your attention, please feel free to say, what is that, or why do you even have it on the screen? The first thing I'm going to attempt to do is explain what conservation is, because now every time for most of my career, people say, what do you do? And I say I'm a conservator, and they look at me like, well, what does that mean? So I tell people I do restoration, which isn't what I do, but they start to get it. So let's see how this works. Okay, this should work. Okay, maybe, is it this one? Well, let's start, okay.
Where's my IT? Where's our?
I thought it was just touch the screen.
Try the up button.
Yeah. Okay, that should continue now. I think we got it, we'll see. When we think in terms of conservation or restoration, I mean, many people, this is about now 15 or 20 years ago, the Sistine Chapel was a big project that made the news, and people were appalled at what was happening. They were saying that these were being repainted, but essentially they were just being cleaned. And here, simply surface cleaning. There's years, hundreds and hundreds of years of candle smoke, and also later heating systems that would have pollutants in the air, which would darken the surfaces. Okay. This photograph just shows you, obviously, cleaned and prior to cleaning. It's pretty dramatic. Not every conservation treatment is that dramatic. This made the news a few years ago. I don't know if you saw it. Ecce Homo and Ecce Mono. This was the original painting. And then a well-intentioned, untrained restorer decided that that's what it was supposed to be. Obviously, there was a gap in a person's knowledge, but this painting was essentially ruined, and it made the news. And again, in terms of conservation, it's everything you would never do, all rolled into one image. So we're familiar with this, and again, Sistine Chapel, and it's clean. And perhaps if that woman had worked on this project, we may have had a slightly different way to interpret that. And so conservation is, we'll get into the definition. I'll try to explain the difference between that and restoration. And I'm supposed to start my stopwatch here, so I don't become guilty of what I didn't want to do. This is a painting that we treated for Dickinson. And again, just to show you, it's a very subtle cleaning. This is just a slightly discolored varnish. And often I get people ask me, so what do you use? What was the material? And I can tell you that it's not that we're reluctant to give information, it's just that everything we work on is entirely different. And so what we're sometimes we're doing solvent cleanings, a mixture of solvents, acetone, ethanol, xylene, and more. Or it's a water-based system where we're adjusting pH. And sometimes we're also using enzymes. So the enzymes that's in our body that breaks down oils and fats, we can take, that's lipase, we can use that enzyme to break down some oil-based varnishes. In this case, this was very simple aqueous cleaning. We make a gel, instead of being very wet and sloppy, we can gel it with cellulose, methyl cellulose or such. So it becomes more like a paste.
Easier to control.
Easier to control, yeah. And this is Jolene, who really is, who runs our business, who's been married to me for a very long time, and who reminds me of the things I'm forgetting to say. Of course, I do the same for her, but just show you some paint. I think when people think in terms of conservation, I think paintings are almost always what come to mind. You know, that's what you're seeing usually on either television programs or you're seeing at museums, and sometimes they'll do even have laboratories that are accessible where you can see conservators working. And this is a painting that we did. It was privately owned. A guy found it in a tag sale, an associate, and it was a lovely Dutch painting, and that's simply removing varnish. Typically, these oil paints, once they're dry about a year, typically a Damar varnish, a pine resin varnish would be put on the painting. It saturates it, but it also is a level of protection. But over time, it literally discolors. So, and then during periods of high humidity and heat, sometimes these coatings will soften, which will pick up more dirt. So they just continue to darken. You may have heard about that when people talk about feeding their furniture. That was an old term. It had linseed oil and a bunch of other stuff in it, but linseed oil on a sticky summer day, or a hot summer day, gets quite sticky, and they darken. So that's what's happened to a lot of paintings. And it's simply cleaning. There was no other retouching, nothing at all, just cleaning the varnish off, and then we will re-varnish. Two options, either use the Damar again, which even after 100 years remains soluble, but we have synthetic acrylic resins that we can put on that don't discolor, but they don't have as long a track record. Tear repair. This is a painting that's in the library here in town, and someone came into the library and was through something and tore this painting. So the repair was done on the back side of the canvas, and then actually lined. There was a secondary canvas attached to the back of that painting, and then just filled. Filling can be done with several different putties, but also what tends to get lost is the brush stroke and the texture. So what we have to do is we actually take a silicone rubber mold from an undamaged area, and then we can press it. We can press that texture back into the area that we fixed, so you don't really see it. Then you match color. Conservation training tends to have us specialize, and I was saying that I was encouraged to specialize when I was finishing grad school, and but I also had been 3 years away from home, going to school while Joe raised our son and supported us. So I knew I had to be marketable. And to be marketable meant I had to be able to do more than one thing. So I didn't specialize. And you see some of the things we worked on, you'll realize, no, he didn't specialize at all. But I did stay gainfully employed, which was kind of the idea. This is our lab. This is our studio now. We moved to Carlisle about 35 years ago. We finished grad school and were hired at the Pennsylvania Museum Commission, and they built a conservation facility there for, I think there were 5 or 6 of us working, people in paintings, people in paper, and then we worked on 3-dimensional artifacts. And then after about 12 years, they shut it down, which was kind of scary, for sure. We had just purchased a house, and now all of a sudden there was no job. But what happened was they needed someone to work on their 3-dimensional artifacts, so they put me on contract, and that's how my business started. So they shut us down and then phased into taking on projects for for the state. And then we learned how to deal with the federal government and doing, responding to
So-
RFPs and all those sorts of things.
So that cannon, where does that go back to?
The Navy Yard. That's
What year? What year?
This is known as Long Tom. It's been done, it was done 10 years ago. I can't remember. We just picked up 2 cannon last Friday from the Navy Yard. One is 9,000 pounds, one is
But is
10,000
that from
pounds.
World War One or?
No, it's 18th century.
18th century, Civil War one.
The ones we just got are.
The Confederate Civil War pieces that are now, and they're exhibited outside at the Navy Yard. So obviously ongoing, they've been repainted a bunch of times, active corrosion, all kinds of materials put into the bore of the gun. In this case, we glass bead blasted that, very fine glass bead, and then we treated it with tannic acid, which turned it black, which is the color they wanted. And then we did a hot wax coating, which also had black pigment in it. This is War of 1812, belongs to the U.S. Army, the National Museum of the U.S. Army at Fort Belvoir, and it's reported to have been the only remaining haversack from the War of 1812 period. And this is our son Braden working on this, and this is our son Colin working on the cannon. So it's, Joe runs the office, and I have my 2 sons that work for us, and then we have 3 other people. I have a textile conservator, and then we have 2 technicians. And that was never part of the plan either. There was never a plan for a family business. It's, as I say, it's a reality show that just hasn't happened yet, and we're thankful. So these are pieces from Hershey, from the Hershey Museum. So you can see we're working on military artifacts. The ethnographic pieces we don't do as often, but they're incredibly beautiful, and we're really privileged to have a chance to treat those. The treatment is often very, very minimal. It's cleaning feathers, making sure we straighten the feathers as much as we can. But most of this project was creating internal mounts so they could be exhibited without damaging them. So it's creating the forms. It's also, a lot of pieces are actually held in place using magnets rather than tacks or staples. We work on quite a few outdoor sculptures. We're just doing an assessment on this piece. Colin's working on an adjusting wheel from a German Pack 88 that was at the Army Heritage Center. This is Lafayette in Baltimore. So we had a contract with the city of Baltimore to clean and repatinate, and most of these are treated with pigmented waxes rather than lacquers, although lacquers sometimes put on bronze. Typically, most of these pieces originally were patinated so they had a brown, sort of a brown statuary color, but without maintenance, they tend to turn green, so it's copper corrosion that's forming. So if they're all green, they haven't been maintained. But they do develop a degree of stability once they've had that corroded state. But aesthetically, they aren't generally what the client wants. This gate's about 12 feet tall. It's from Arlington National Cemetery. They were removed from it's known as the Sheridan Gate, and these gates were taken down in the early 1970s and stored outside in the dirt. So it became a priority, and they came to us now. It's been about 2 years, I believe, but they've been painted multiple times, more than you can even begin to imagine. So in this case, we've taken cross sections, and we're looking at sections of paint microscopically to see what's there. So what we found that there was a lot of gilding on these gates. And so we took samples, we found gilding. It seemed as though there was no repetition of pattern. They changed where they put the gilding. Finally, with curatorial input, we decided these are the areas that we're going to re-gild. So these were, and many pieces were missing. So I think I may have some of that. Yeah, so this is after treatment. We found this image in a book from about 1920, and then this image appeared, and right there, that little finial was gone from the gates that we had. So because of that image, we were able to recreate these finials. If and it was a fluke that we found that image, because there's just no others that we know of.
There's a lot of research at times.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time researching. I think I have slides about conservation here in a minute. Oh, there we go. You all can read, but conservation focuses on the stabilization and preservation of an object, prevent future deterioration. We don't attempt to make them look new. You know, restoration is about trying to recreate the appearance as an object was first made. And while, if you think in terms of automobiles, you see some really beautiful early cars and their paint is perfect, but their sense of history and use is gone. Conservation, we try to maintain that. We have a 1920 Model T depot hack, a Woody, that was never touched. That car gets twice as much attention as any car that's new and shiny, because it looks as though, okay, this is real, it hasn't been altered. So we try to do that with almost every artifact we work on. The goal is not to have it look like it's been neglected or mistreated for the past 50 years, but rather it's been well maintained and cared for. And we do that without, it's not repainting, it's not stripping paint off, but it's stabilization of existing paint. And that's what we did here at this house, and we'll see that later on. So and also using materials that are different than the original, so that you can determine what we've done as opposed to what the original artist did, which really kind of makes the whole problem-solving issue convoluted, because yeah, I could use oil paint and match it perfectly, but I can't use oil paint. I have to use an acrylic that looks like and have to mimic the appearance, and also have to be able to remove it. So whatever I do to an object, at least in theory, my attempt is to do the repair. So if I choose an adhesive, I'm going to do an adhesive that I can undo. So a furniture repair, I'd use hot hide glue, which is how many of the early pieces were made, rather than Type Bond or any wood glue, or even an epoxy, because I have to be able to inject something into that repair that would allow me or allow the next person to undo my work. I spend a lot of time undoing bad work. So somebody wants to fix their mother's rocking chair, so they get the epoxy out, and then I'll spend 2 days trying to take it apart without breaking it apart. So my adhesives are reversible. My paints are reversible. My varnishes that I apply are solvent reversible. So and ideally, again, it doesn't impede future examination and understanding of what an object is. So the basic phases of everything we work on, so we're going to take the piece, we're going to examine it as much as possible. Sometimes it's microscopically, sometimes it is, we do chemical analysis. They have a cool little, it's called an XRF gun. I can point at a piece of metal, it'll give me the alloy content. So we do a full examination, then documentation both is written, what I'm seeing, what I'm finding, and then also photographic documentation. So part of our training is photography. And stabilization, that's what we did here. You can't always stop deterioration, but you can slow it down. Sometimes it's slowed down by injecting a resin to keep the paint from flaking. Sometimes it's done by improving the environment. There's a wide range of options, not always successful. And then restoration, so if I have a painting where there's a large piece that's torn or broken off, that's where I'll come in with my in-painting and attempt to return it to a closer to its original appearance. And so I tell people I'm a restorer, and that's kind of what I do, it's part of what I do. This is where Joe usually says, but something I didn't get there.
I'll wait.
You'll wait, tell me later, great, thanks. We'll just go through some examples of stuff. This is we tend to work on really big objects. That's kind of what happened. I worked in the trades for a number of years before going back to grad school. Joe was going through nursing school. I was trying to support us at that point. So I don't know if I'll get to it very much, but almost everything I've ever done in terms of weird jobs has come back to haunt me sometimes, but help me most times. So I was a carpenter, and we built sailboats. We worked on fiberglass. I drove forklift. I drove truck. I mean, post and beam framing, you know, I pretty much, whatever I had to do to survive, I pretty much did it, but it almost comes back almost every day to help me in what I do now. This is the Stagecoach from Gene Autry, about 1850s, but it was owned by Gene Autry. And
What came around like the one
yeah, I mean,
before.
I don't think maybe I can go backwards. So, yeah, I have another example too, but from here up was completely just dark varnish. Down here, it had these lower quarter panels had been messed with. And what they did, someone was attempting to restore it, and they took a putty knife and scraped all the paint off. But they didn't get to the upper half, and you wouldn't expect. Abbott Downing made these stagecoaches in New Hampshire and shipped them all over the world. So it wasn't some guy in the shop making them, it was a factory. And this decoration, this scroll work, even these flowers came from the factory. You could order basically, there was a yellow ochre and there was a red body type.
They were beautiful.
Yeah, well, we have some more of that coming up. And this was, okay. This was pretty much all that was left on that quarter panel. I could see that it had scroll work, but it didn't really mean much because this is the first Concord coach that I had worked on. But we went to the library, or actually the archives, and we found they had pattern books showing the scroll work that they used on their carriages. So a curator from the museum in Stony Brook, which has an incredible carriage collection, sent these to me. So now I had an understanding what the scroll work should be.
Did you have color?
We had, well, the only color we had was just what was remained on the carriage, and then we would do pigment analysis too, you know, so we could tell pretty much what pigments were used. But so this is after cleaning. This is what we ended up with. Someone had tried to recreate that because they knew they took something off they shouldn't have. So we put down an isolation varnish, a varnish that we used to separate our work from the original. And then we used, this was a base coat we put down. It's an acrylic resin. It's not an oil-based paint. Originally it would have been. And then we created a template, punched holes through it, and we pounced with chalk to get the pattern. And then that's slightly out of focus, but that's what we recreated to match at least the other pieces we had seen. And also we went and saw several other Concord coaches that still had some original paint. I actually didn't do this myself. We had an art student who was in her like junior year, so Robin worked with us, you know, three summers. Yeah. But Robin did the work, and she doesn't paint anymore, unfortunately. I show these as sort of precautionary. If you go to any antique shop, you're going to find a lot of stripped blanket chests. But so often, that's been overpainted, and what ends up with someone not knowing, or like the carriage, not really taking time to really look at it, end up stripping them down to bare wood. And here's an example where before it was completely gone, they realized, yeah, oh my, there's actually graining there that probably should be preserved. So I put that out there. I bought a number of stripped blanket chests and recreated them to store my stuff at home, but unfortunately the original is gone. Velocipede. So again, we've done carriages, now we have a bicycle. And when you first get it, it looks as though very little is left. You know, why did that come into the studio? So we have active corrosion on the iron pieces. We have nickel plated that are black, or have copper corrosion on them, because under the nickel there's a layer of copper. Leather deteriorated, paint's flaking off. But when you clean it, all the original striping, even though worn, is still there, and becomes the only example of a velocipede of that period that hasn't been stripped. Last year we just finished, in terms of a two-wheel vehicle, we just did a 1902 Indian motorcycle. It was number 14, and all indication was that that motorcycle didn't exist anymore. Experts in Indian motorcycles argued the point. It came to us, and had its original paint. The nickel was still there, but it was under layers of corrosion. So we actually preserved the original, much like this, and it went to the Quail, which is
Higher than.
one step above Pebble Beach, and it won preservation class. It's privately owned, but the kind of information that would be so easily lost was all there with just taking the time. So that's, on this bike, you know, nickel was cleaned, the leather was stabilized. All we added was this leather strap, which is actually the brake. You know, and we did that because we did a lot of research, but it's just like a sewing machine treadle strap that.
I love that front fender.
Yeah, I really think that does too much, no. But you twist the handlebars and it activates the rear brake. I wouldn't want to go down too much of a hill though. So we find ourselves falling in love with all the different things we work on. It's really, it's a real privilege. We're talking to some gentlemen, no, we don't really collect much of anything. Our collection kind of comes into our studio and we get to have it for a while and then it goes back out. So it's less expensive that way. And again, that's the pedal just showing, you know, it looks like there's nothing there with some cleaning. And the cleaning it's a chemical cleaning. It's a chelating solution. It's a mixture of chemicals, and so it's allowing us to break through the copper without impacting the nickel. And we have a lot of notes and things we've written down. It's like there's no way to hold all that in your head. So I've been doing this now 35 years. Yeah. So I have lots of notes strewn around that I'm trying to organize because sooner or later that torch will get passed and some of that information should be moved along. I'm not sure if my two sons are going to continue the business or not. That was, like I said, never the plan, and they're interesting personalities. I'm not sure they could or would want to. 1834 coach carriages, very few early carriages. Civil War and later, that's most of what you see early 19th, late 19th century. Early pieces just don't exist, in large part because only the wealthy owned them, and they were generally driven with a driver. I mean, there were farm wagons and there were such, but and also they were a taxable item. So we have two 18th century coaches right now in our studio, one from Mount Vernon, one in a private collection, and the private piece has been untouched, but they're actually coming from England to see it because none exist in England, and this is an English carriage, so it was brought over in 1780. They went out of fashion, and if you had the money to have multiple horses and a coachman, you would get a new carriage when the other was destroyed. And you aren't going to get like a used car because the person who would get the used car wouldn't have the means to even support it. So they are very rare. That green carriage is actually yellow ochre. But the client, here's a cross section. This isn't from this vehicle, but that's typically what you find. So these are cellular structure of the wood. You may get a priming layer. It's been repainted like 5 or 6 times. There's actually 2 layers of red there. And these are varnish layers, the clear ones. And if we put it under ultraviolet light, they'll refluoresce differently too, so you can see. Sometimes it's helpful in how we treat it, but more often than not, it's a way of documenting what really is there. Because if a client doesn't know that there's multiple layers underneath, they're more inclined, if they're going to do something, they're going to remove it because there's nothing underneath anyhow. That's rarely the case that there's nothing underneath. Okay, let's go back here. Again, just showing you cross sections. I just purchased a microscope, so I'm going to try to do most of this myself now. We would be sending it out in the past, but there's such a delay in getting the results back. This I believe this is from, no it's not because there's no ochre layer there. Anyhow, just throw you some cross sections because we do that a lot. Is part of the analysis that I was talking about. Okay, I'm still going backwards. Let's go forward. Again, the assumption is that nothing is there. It's been overpainted. But in close examination, there's actually a hint of a yellow stripe. And so that's cleaning. Okay, that's not like all recovered. So half of that is what was left, and the other half is what I've reconstructed. So we clean the surface, we use a resin to consolidate it, flow under the flaking paint. We'll iron the paint down with a tacking iron with heat, and then we'll in-paint. And we don't overpaint. We basically think paint by number, but you're only putting paint where there is none. So you're filling in the voids, not putting paint over top of the original surfaces. A little tedious. Like every job, there are parts that just aren't fun. That's inside the carriage. Again, the really important addition. We had one example. This is called coach lace, and every window would basically drop down into the panel of the door, and you'd raise it with that coach lace. The coach lace would typically be on the front edges of seats, and this is original, and obviously this is a different color, but there is one man in England who reproduces it, and we sent samples, and the client, this is state of California, wanted it reproduced. Our text, so again, a typical problem is rodents, squirrels, big rodents like raccoons. There's a carriage we did for the Henry Ford that raccoons lived in for a while in the museum. And this is great nesting material. But, okay, webbing clothes moths, typical things of, the moths eating the wool. All these interiors are generally either leather or wool broadcloth. And that webbing part, that's what you see there. That's not cobwebs, that's webs from moths. So again, here we have original coach lace, reproduction coach lace. This cushion was reproduced because it was missing. This weird carpet would not have been there originally, but we found they had recarpeted it sometime during its use. So we actually, so again, these are those cushions that were completely eaten. So we would insert fabric behind it, match as much as we can. We aren't always trying to make it invisible. We're just trying to preserve as much of the original as possible. Okay, that was before. It certainly doesn't look new, but it looks presentable. And those little stitches right here, that's literally over sewing, just trying to hold the fabric together. And that little piece of carpet was under the seat, and it's very similar to the pattern that we found. We were down, it's right here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Weavertown Coach?
Yeah, I think so.
They had, so anyhow, we were able to,
Old samples and stuff.
yeah, so we were able to get a section. And that's after treatment. Again, it looks, we did reproduce the leather side curtains, those were gone. So those are reproduced, but we had one or two for patterns. So there is some restoration that takes place. And that conversation isn't something those decisions aren't made solely by me. When I'm working for an institution, I'm getting input from the curator. It's really their responsibility to tell me what they want. They should know the object better than I do. But because of that kind of intimate connection, we spend so much time researching that we end up maybe knowing almost as much as the curator would. We do tanks. This tank is in Boalsburg, and someone decided to paint it yellow and blue, and they put a Model A Ford engine in it instead of the French or the Buddha. This is an FT-17. This one is French. There's an M1917, which is almost identical. American and French working together. We did this, we thought, well, never going to do another tank. Well, I've done now 4 of these. It's a 2-man tank, 2-person tank. I'm sure at the time it was a 2-man tank. I don't think there were many women in them. But under that yellow and blue that looks completely out of character is yellow and blue. So it came from the factory, olive drab green, and that's what you're seeing there. And then that dazzle, it's called dazzle camouflage, was applied. So as we're removing that blue and yellow paint, we're starting to find the pattern of the original camouflage. Just remnants. And this is the only tank from this period that retained any of its original camouflage. So here we are kind of like chalking it out where the pattern should be. The interesting, this tank, I actually made an insurance claim. We have an apron. We have an apron on our old studio. It's slightly slanted, and we were bringing it out of the studio to be picked up, and it started to roll, and it ran into my van. So I had to report that I was rear-ended by
They didn't quite get it.
but they did pay up. It was a small damage, but anyhow.
Your premiums go up.
Should have.
So that's actually the pattern and colors that that tank was on the battlefield. So that's at Bollesburg right now.
And that would be camouflaging?
It's called, if you look, even some ships in World War II, they did, if you find some images, they had these geometric patterns all over them, and it would sort of break, it wouldn't hide it. It would kind of like, I think, make it difficult for range finding. And I'm not an expert on that. But anyhow, dazzle, look it up. Dazzle camouflage. So before, and that was, yeah, there we go. And this is my second. This was done for the Army, and this is the Five of Hearts. And this is an image of it recovering from the battlefield in 1918. And this is now on exhibit at the Army Museum down in Fort Belvoir. So it wasn't, its camo pattern was gone, but we have an enhanced version of this image showing this almost identical with this camo pattern. And this is a skid, so if you're a tail skid, so if you're going through trench warfare, if you're going down into a trench, if you came back up, that tail skid would prevent you from rolling over on your back. But the bullet hole pattern in that skid is what verified that this was the tank. So the muffler was missing, so we made that and then took it to our farm and shot it. So that was a good day for the guys. They really enjoyed that one. So, and again, this becomes more restoration here. This isn't conservation. I'm trying to be accurate in the information I have. Okay, I have 1:42, but I'm going to go. I have a lot more pictures. I'm going to go fast. Anyhow, Monkey Abel, or is this Baker? I don't remember which is which. But this is his, and I show this because it's an amazing connection. This was also at the Army Museum, National Museum for the U.S. Army. And this came into our studio. I have this book. I bought that book when I was 12. These pictures are in that book. I worked on the object. Mind-blowing for me, mind-blowing. I sort of was getting ready for conservation long before I knew I was doing it. Definitely long before I knew. Another little interesting thing, same book on spaceflight. And Kittinger jumped out of this high altitude balloon. I'm working on the balloon at the Air Force Museum in Dayton. Again, humbling actually. Another stagecoach. I told you about feeding your furniture. That's linseed oil repeatedly applied. And that's underneath the linseed oil. And this is from Barre, Massachusetts. Huge stagecoach. It was basically pick people up from the rail depot, taking them to the hotels. And that's actually, these painters, there was lithographs of it's Venus wrestling with Cupid. And they recreated that on the door at the factory. Okay. So that's literally removing varnish with very little retouching. But the museum committee wanted to strip it and have it restored. So there were two women who said, let's at least see what's there. So that's why we did the door first. We did the door, by putting the door back on, it stopped the committee from going any further with the idea of stripping it. And it was probably 8 years between they decided we're going to wait and do it right. It was quite a long time. But,
And was it in your studio?
Yes.
yeah. No, it wasn't in my studio the whole time. No, we went back, the door was there, they could see it.
Yeah, and then they finally brought it down.
But they went so far as finally build a coach house for it. And, so now it's, it's well protected. Clock, this is Detroit, Detroit Historical Society. Someone came in and threw a brick through it because they thought it was the doomsday device. And that's what the glass dial looked like. And so it came to us, and it sat on our bench and kind of was like a jigsaw puzzle that you never really put away. So for months we would put pieces on it because you couldn't figure it out. And then, so eventually we were able to get it back together, but beyond conservation. So we had a piece of glass cut, and then we made a pattern, and then, so we gilded the letters. I can't remember how we did. I think we painted the black first, and then the gilding was on top of that. So we recreated, that's restoration. So that's the dial. And then, again, one more book that I had when I was 12. Sometimes I believe there was a plan long before I had one. And we thought, oh, well, then we're Detroit, maybe we'll get to do this house. Wrong. Well, no, we got to do this house. And that's in Buffalo, or Niagara Falls. It's Prophet Isaiah Robertson's Second Coming house. And the Kohler Foundation, like toilet bowls and all that sort of stuff, they have a large annual budget for preservation of folk art. And this is a satellite view. These are you'll see these are they're standing, and now they're not. They're all laying down. They're 25 feet tall. So this one gentleman.
He was amazing.
Oops, I'm off the thing. So there's Prophet Isaiah Robertson, and he had a vision. He believed that his job was to tell people that the imminent return of Christ, and they all had to go past his house. And we said, well, why? Because he was on the way to Goat Island in the Niagara River, where you were going to separate the sheep from the goats, if you remember any of that story from me. So he built this as a way of telling those folks that they, what might be ahead. So all of this was done out of scrap wood. He did it entirely by himself, and as he aged, it collapsed. And they decided that they wanted to reproduce it, which is mind-boggling to me.
We did not want the job.
Yeah, we tried not to get the job, but I mean, this is a timber. These are notch for the floor. So this framing from a building. These are big discs, a 4-foot disc of 4-foot diameter disc of plywood. So we flew our drone and we gridded it, did a grid system like archaeology, so we would know where things go. By the way, those are individual rocks. So we had like 250 rocks that we had to bring back and
Individually photographed.
and then do photograph, document, and recreate, repaint, because the paint was like falling off of them. So we did a lot of sketching. Okay, so I wasn't an engineer. I wanted to be an architect, but my guidance counselor told me I wasn't smart enough. So let that go. And if there's any educators here, I don't know if there are any, be encouraging. Because I can say I have 2 teachers said, you know what, this might be something you'll be good at. And you know what, you're smarter than you're showing. Changed my life. So that's a big rock. That would,
This is in Buffalo?
yeah, Niagara Falls.
Niagara Falls.
Okay. So, anyhow, the whole thing came to our studio and we reproduced every single piece of it using PVC lumber.
So it won't rot, it won't also ultraviolet, and the light won't.
So also now so our one son is a really great welder, so we're doing structural steel inserts. So essentially this PVC lumber has no structural integrity, it's like a noodle. So we're having to create forms that looks exactly like the original, but all held together by 6-inch squared steel tube. So there it is, back. Every rock. We didn't do the house. The house is still as original.
They're using it for an art center.
But these towers are 25 feet tall, and there's 5 of them. Okay.
Huh, and each of those little things are rocks.
Well, I'm sorry.
Are rocks?
No, on the ground are rocks. All those are. That's now we basically use the CNC to recreate some of them.
Oh.
Were the neighbors glad to see it back?
It's in a pretty rough neighborhood. So actually they were glad to see it back because the neighborhood was going the wrong direction. And we were amazed, we thought, this is a neighborhood like, okay, we're white guys in this neighborhood and we were the only white guys in this neighborhood, but they were thrilled, the neighbors were thrilled to have this put back and they loved this man. And they were concerned that it was when we were taking it down that we were gonna be destroying it. When we saw us putting it back up, all of a sudden, it's now a focal point of their neighborhood, and it's on the tourist maps and guides for Niagara
So they
Falls.
love it. They love
Yeah,
it.
Good.
but anyhow, I'm gonna move quick. Have any of you read Into the Wild or saw the movie? Yeah, well, that's the bus. And they flew it out of the wild. They cut huge holes in the roof. You might remember some of the stories that is outside of Fairbanks, that there was a young couple on their honeymoon. She got swept away by the river and died, and it became what they considered a very dangerous situation because people were coming from all over the world to see this. And so they flew it out, and that's when they contacted us. So it's in the engineering department at Fairbanks, at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks. And so this is so these are the holes that were cut in it. This is these names scratched in it, Argentina. I mean, you cannot believe how many people came to see this after either reading the book or seeing the movie. This is what's inside the bus. And this is a memorial plaque that McChandless's sister put in this bus. So again, a lot of active corrosion, the floors are deteriorating, holes have been cut in the bus, so we've worked on a lot of historic vehicles. We've worked on we've worked on half a dozen of Ford vehicles that belong to Thomas Edison. We've worked on all the collection at Vanderbilt, stuff like that. So we try to take the principles of conservation and apply them in areas where it hasn't traditionally been done. And that sort of grew out of the carriage conservation work. So yeah, reconstructing. We're doing fiberglass repair. I told you I built fiberglass boats in one day, so I'm pretty good at fiberglass. Colin's really good at welding, so we're reconstructing. Some of the pieces they have cut out, they retained, so we're able to put them back in the original position. They're planning to open this to the public. People will get into this bus. So structurally, we had to take care of certain pieces, so we fabbed up a new step that had the structural integrity of people to step on, but then overlaid it with the original that had rusted through. So we're trying to maintain as much original material as possible. 142 was a particular target of hunters. So this bus was first owned by is a 1942 Hart International. It was owned by the Army, then it got transferred to as a school bus in Fairbanks, and then it was then turned into a city transportation bus. So that's where it says Fairbanks County Transit System. But 142 was, when hunters are out there, maybe I have a picture.
No.
I don't, anyhow. So
they used to shoot at it anyway.
Yeah, so they're really good. They shot 142 completely out. This is what was in it. McCandless died on this back there. We actually ran into the hunter, believe it or not, who actually found him. When we worked there in
2 years ago.
in January through end of March. So, you know, it was a great time to go to Fairbanks.
Yeah.
But anyhow, so yeah, this is what I'm saying. These are the bullet holes where 142 is. So what we did is we essentially overlaid with a thin piece of iron and used so magnets held it in place, and then we had photos to reconstruct 142. So all of that's still underneath, but for exhibit purposes, it looks complete. And the 5 degrees is that's pretty spectacular skyline. So yeah, that was
Is it put
Fairbanks.
back where it was?
No, they're going to be exhibited outside the Museum of the North on the campus of the University of Alaska. They have a number of other exhibits, and this is going to be an outdoor exhibit with some sort of a protective shelter. So our treatment had to be somewhat weather resistant. So the materials we chose might not be as reversible as time might be able to remove, but they had to be durable. So sometimes we make that kind of decision. Okay, these are the last few slides I'm going to talk about here. This is why you came. If these walls could talk, and I would stop. This is a photo that Tom Benji had reproduced. We put up back on the wall. We all know these images. And we've lived in Carlisle 30-some years, but didn't know that this existed. And they're really fun to look at. I mean, it was really creative. But I think Tom contacted us initially because of flaking paint. You know, Minnie or Mickey, whichever. I think Minnie was losing paint. So the idea was that we need to come in and consolidate that paint. Something needed to be done, and so our first step is obviously just taking a gander, looking around. Stuff had already been lost. And so we came and we tested, you know, there's several different consolidants, you know, there's animal-based glues, there's thermoplastic resins that get sticky again with heat. So we were doing some testing, and also what our test is solubility of the art itself. What makes the art dissolve? So I can't use an adhesive that's going to make the art dissolve if it should drip on it. So we have little pieces right there. We have blotting paper with a syringe, putting paint, you know, acrylic behind each flake. Yes.
What were the drawings done with?
They're everything. There's ink, there's pencil, there's pastel, there's chalk,
Yeah.
which is, we'll look at that, which is the problem.
Everything's different.
So in this case, we're using little artist brushes, trying to flow it in. And this paint isn't very shiny. So even many of these resins tend to be shiny. So you have to get the resin in behind the paint instead of on the surface. So not a really fast process. So Aquazol, that's a water-based adhesive we used, and this is B72 and xylene. If you ever talk to a conservator, B72 is like, you know, kind of the magic stuff. It's like varnish, it's glue, it's consolidant. It's an acrylic resin by Roman Haas, and it doesn't yellow, and so it always stays soluble in xylene. I only have about 5 more slides. So this again is what some of the resins, if you put them on top of it, it gets a little shiny, and you have to then put a matting agent in that. But I want to show you what we did first in this house. Okay, so anybody who's worked on an old house, lives in an old house, has an understanding already. But this is outside, this is German siding that this house has. Think clapboard. And then there's wooden 3/4 inch, 1 inch thick boards that are horizontal that are nailed onto the studs. These show boards, but these should be like 2x4s in here.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's lath, wood lath nailed onto the studs, and then a layer of plaster. And that's just a picture showing a person putting in plaster, pushing it through the cracks in the lath, and pushing it through is significant, and we'll see that here in a minute. Because it isn't just a bond to the wood, the plaster sticking to the wood, it's actually the plaster slipping through the cracks and dripping down and holding it in place like that.
They're called keys.
They're called keys, and sometimes they'll break off and just fall down into the cavity, but sometimes, well, Well, sometimes they just break off behind the plaster. They're still attached to the plaster, but they move in and out. And what we found here was that, yeah, we had flaking paint, but we had plaster that wasn't even attached to the wooden lath. So if you pushed on it, you got complete movement. So it's like, okay, haven't done that before, so now what? I show a picture here. This, if you could take this, that's a ceiling, but if you want to go on the wall, they have these special little metal washers. So you could actually kind of do a countersink and drill through the plaster to attach it to the lath from the inside. But when you have paintings all over the wall, you can't do that, right? So because it would destroy the pictures. So we had to work from the outside in. But before we did that, we built more walls inside the house. So we just, 2x4s on the floor, diagonals, this is plywood. So we put these about 2 to 3 feet away from the walls that we had to work on. We worked primarily on that outside wall. And then we put up 1/2-inch thick plexiglass, a mylar or polyethylene sheeting up against the wall, then plexiglass against that. And then we braced with 2x4s to hold the plaster in place before we went outside. So that's there, and there's the plexiglass, there's plastic sheeting behind that. So we've consolidated the paint with brushes in some areas, ironed it down, and now that that's done, we started dealing with the plaster that's coming off the wall. So we went outside and took off the siding and took off the interior sheathing. These are the sheathing boards still left. That's because the wainscoting is down to high, we didn't have to take those off. And then this is what we found in behind. It looks like the keys are still there for the most part, but in some cases they actually just broke off the plaster. So it looks like the woodpeckers had attacked, so we drilled holes through the wood lath. We had to stop on our drill bits, we weren't drilling through the plaster, and drilled a whole series of holes in the wood lath, and then injected. In fact, what we used, we didn't know what, we needed something that was going to flow, but we needed something that was going to expand and catch any gaps. So Gorilla Glue with water foams up. It gets really, so we used with syringes, injected this Gorilla Glue that we diluted with water, floated in through the holes so it adhered the plaster to the lath. And then that's actually before, but because I know the siding was replaced. And a couple more things. These are just some pictures. And because I know there's some cleaning tests done that not everybody was happy with what was done. But if you touch, and now the plexiglass is up, which is a really good thing, but you could go almost anywhere in the kitchen, you could touch a surface and you're going to get some transferred to your hand, which complicates cleaning. And before, like you said, there's pastel, there's charcoal, there's pen. But this fox is over the door going out, and somebody was trying to clean it at one point, and it's just pastel chalk. So they used a wet sponge, and they stopped. They said, oh no, look what we're doing. And so that's what we were able to do after. So there was some degree of conservation we did on that. But again, there's budget considerations and what really needs to be done. So, we cleaned up around the perimeter. We re-enhanced again using pastel. So it looks better than that. It's not perfect. And then this one, I know people wanted the walls cleaned, and I said, I don't think this can be done. And this bather or diver is over the door going into the parlor, I guess. And you couldn't see her really. Her skin and wall color are the same things, but with very fine chalk lines to define her shape. So and you almost couldn't tell that there were these waves that were there. So what we did is we cleaned around her, because if we cleaned any part of her body, it would have just disappeared. There'd be nothing left. So, she's visible now. It's not an ideal cleaning, and where do you start? Where do you stop? Because this was probably done, it was done with vinyl eraser, but vinyl eraser was fine on just dirt and smoke, but vinyl eraser would take the pencil off, so you can't, how do you clean around that, with an eraser? and I just put that up because that was fun, and it's on the walls too. Anyhow, that's what these walls talked about, and thank you, and again, it's a beautiful spring day, so go out and enjoy it. But thank you very much. Any questions? I'll take a couple, and we're just...
Yeah, no, anybody have any questions?
Give a little background on who put the names there and.
Sure.
Not me, Tom Benji should be doing that.
Yeah, well, I believe I forgot to mention, my name is Ann Daly and I'm the president of Craighead House here. So, I've been here I volunteered for about 6 years, and that was an immense education, so thank you very much. Just before I get to your question, just a little bit of an update on Craighead House. In December, we finished the last of the renovations, which was the plastic on the walls around the kitchen. And then in the meantime, between then and now, we found out that there's incredible rot up on the walls on the sleeping porch, so they will be coming down in May time frame in the next couple of months, and they'll be redoing that whole thing, and then we'll be done. So this year is a transitional year for us where we are moving from the renovations into education. And this talk was a major education about what was going on during the renovations for the kitchen. The kitchen itself, the very first, it's a 70-year history in the kitchen of all the paintings. The very first painting that went up was Uncle Eugene Craighead in 1929 did the rats and the cats over the stovepipe. When the stovepipe came out, he did that. Well, the kids were so excited about that. It was, oh my, can we do that too? Can we do that too? And the moms, at sometimes during the summer, there was as much as 17 people staying here in the house. So at that time, the moms said, you can paint on the wall if you clean the part of the wall you're gonna paint on. So that's how they got it cleaned off. So the very first painting that went up after the cats and the rats was the owl that you will see on the western wall. And young John Craighead did that. And then in 1999, I believe it was Jean's 80th birthday, and it was the last time that the Craigheads spent here at the house as a family, spent a summer, part of a summer at the house. So on this wall, facing there, in the corner above the table, you'll see a bear, and next to that you'll see a whale, and her son, who was a marine biologist at the time, painted the whale. Jean painted the bear. The fox over the door that Brian mentioned, Jean's very first book was called Volpe's the Fox, and I think that was in 1949 that she wrote that book, and that's why the fox is over the door too. So that's where the kind of the emphasis, and then through the years, everybody, family, friends, even an Indian Raja put his emblem up on the wall. And his story is that during the 1930s, the twins, Frank Jr. and John, also were into falconry, and they were one of the few groups that introduced falconry to the United States. They got a write-up, they wrote a story, took pictures in National Geographic. The Raja over in India, a young prince named Baba, read it, and they started corresponding back and forth. The brothers, the twins, invited the Raja, the prince, out to Craighead House here, and he came and spent a summer with them in the 1930s. So that's why his emblem is up on the wall as well. So there's all sorts of things going on. The battleship, they were in World War II, and they were in the Navy, and that's why the battleship is up there too. The naked lady facing us, Jean Craighead drew that one, just because, you know, certain ages do those kind of things. So she drew that, so whenever there was guests in the house, Mom would always put a tea towel up over it. So that's a little story about that one. So there's all sorts of different things. There's friends' names. There's, you know, even when the house was empty, sometimes people came in and wrote their names on the walls too. So a couple things I did want to mention is that we are going to be having house tours after. So if you'd like to stay, please meet on the porch, and we'll have a couple couple of our docents take you through. If you don't receive our newsletter now, which has, we're turning it into more of an educational type newsletter on history, gardening, everything that had to do with the Craigheads and around the house. Please, we have a visitor's book out there. Put your name and your email address, and you'll get our monthly newsletter, which will also give you the schedule of our future events coming through too. And we also offer Camp Craighead. If you have any children or grandchildren, we do craft nights and various things with them that you'll find out. So thank you. Is there any other questions for Brian at all? So.
Yeah, thanks again for
Okay,
being here on a
thank
nice
you.
day.
Okay, thank you, everybody. If you'd like a tour, like I said, please meet on the porch.
Oh, I do, yes. Yeah.
I'll see you again.
Work there, yeah.